Velkommen tilbage til min kanal Sainabou. Den her dokumentarserie er som sagt et forsøg på at sætte ord og tanker på nogle af de bekymringer, jeg har, når det kommer til hele den teknologiske udvikling, og mere specifikt den måde, teknologien påvirker os alle sammen. Vi er alle sammen en del af et verdensomspændende eksperiment, drevet af tusindvis af sublime signaler.
Back in 2012, Facebook wanted to see the power of emotional contagion, meaning that if they changed certain information or news you get in your feed, will it have an impact on what you post? Well, they actually set out and did an experiment, and The Atlantic wrote about it in great detail, so let me give you what those details are. For 1 week in January of 2012, data scientists skewed what almost 700,000 Facebook users saw when they logged onto its service. Some people were shown content with a preponderance of happy and positive words. Some were shown content analyzed as sadder than average. And when the week was over, these manipulated users were more likely to post either especially positive or negative words themselves. So the study found that by manipulating the news feeds displayed to 689,003 Facebook users, it could affect the content which those users posted to Facebook. More negative news led to more negative status messages, as more positive news led to positive statuses.
I think this experiment is actually super interesting.
Yeah.
And in some crazy way, I'm happy they did it, even though they shouldn't have done it, right? Now, understand context, though. First of all, it only affected 0.1% in terms of the observed change that they saw. So it's not like you feed in a couple positive notes and then by the end of the week, 680,000 people are like, woohoo, yeah, I'm floating in cloud 9. No, it's just a tiny change, 0.1%, okay? Having said that, that affected hundreds of thousands of emotional expressions and status updates per day. So it's still a huge effect because you're giving it to so many people. Now, of course, the reason some people are upset are like, yeah, okay, that's hunky-dory maybe if you got the positive ones. It's definitely not hunky-dory if you got the negative ones. And then by the end of the week, like, unbeknownst to yourself, you're feeling crappier because Facebook fed your crappy feelings.
Yeah, so people are hurt because they feel as though their emotions were manipulated based on this experiment that Facebook did. By the way, it's going to be published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, which is, of course, a very prestigious journal. But the reason why Facebook did this isn't because they wanted to carry out some great sociological experiment. They wanted to see, how this impacts what you post, how often you post, and how much you post. So one thing that they found is that if you have neutral news in your feed, then you're less likely to post anything at all. So they want to ensure that the information they put in your feed, and remember, they do prioritize certain things over others, they want to make sure that when they post things on your feed and make it visible to you, you're more likely to have some sort of reaction and write something on your wall. That leads to more advertising, that leads to more money. That's their entire business model. But what I find really funny about this story is that we've been doing stories about Facebook collecting your data and then literally giving it to third parties in order to sell to advertisers. And yeah, people got a little upset about that. But in the grand scheme of things, this experiment is nothing. Yeah, they manipulate your newsfeed all the time. You shouldn't be surprised about it.
Yeah. So now people say, look, technically it's perfectly legal. It's in the terms of service that they could do whatever the hell they want with that information, including this, right? Studying it, researching it. I like the idea that Facebook cares about humanity, and that's why they did this.
Yeah.
Of course not. They did it to see how they could make more money. But that's also another interesting thing that we learn. I'm not overly surprised by it, but you see that if you give people bland stuff, they don't want to write. And Facebook's like, that's not good.
Yeah.
That doesn't help business. Let's rile up people's emotions.
Yeah.
Right?
So in other words, like if you wrote something boring on your wall, it's less likely to show up on your friend's newsfeed because now Facebook knows that your friends aren't really going to respond to it and you're not going to be a more active user. So
we don't know that they've acted on that yet.
Yeah.
Okay, but it does seem likely. So they're likely to send you they're not creating ones, but they only give you a certain amount of things that your friends post on your feed. They're more likely to give you the ones that are more emotional, whether they make you angry, they make you happy, they make you, if you have negative feelings or positive feelings, that's going to get piped into you more based on the results of this research study. So in some ways, look, of course, Anna is right. A sad day for you. Like, you signed up for Facebook. This is part of what you get along with it, let alone selling your info in mass to, not necessarily privately, but in mass to advertisers, and it is what it is. But if you're uncomfortable with it, Look, I don't even know what you could do at this point. Where do you go?
Yeah.
Of course, there are other businesses that do this, but they've captured the market so thoroughly, they feel like you're not realistically going to go anywhere else. So we can do this research study, we can do that. You're not going anywhere.
Det lyder måske meget uskyldigt det hele. Men Cambridge Analytica havde så meget data fra forskellige borgere, der havde en Facebook-profil helt tilbage i 2012, at de som et resultat af det kunne finde frem til, hvordan de målrettede sig mod de her Facebook-brugers frygt, imod deres indre dæmoner. Hvordan de målrettede sig mod deres paranoia, mod deres vrede, deres indre vrede, som de måske ikke engang selv kendte til. Som at sidde med hånden på triggeren, kunne de i den virkelige verden udløse forskellige følelser hos folk. Og ved at udløse de her meget følsomme følelser, fik Cambridge Analytica rent faktisk manipuleret Facebook-brugerne til forskellige ting. De fik dem manipuleret til at melde sig ind i en gruppe. De kunne fortælle dem, hvilken slags mennesker de skulle omgås. De kunne selv fortælle dem, hvem de skulle stemme på. Og det er præcis det samme, som Facebook efterfølgende så forsøger at gøre.
Mr. Zuckerberg, would you be comfortable sharing with us the name of the hotel you stayed in last night?
No.
If you've messaged anybody this week, would you share with us the names of the people you've messaged?
Senator, no, I would probably not choose to do that publicly here.
I think that may be what this is all about. Your right to privacy, the limits of your right to privacy, and how much you give away in modern America in the name of, quote, connecting people around the world. A question basically of what information Facebook's collecting, who they're sending it to, and whether they ever asked me in advance my permission to do that. Is that a fair thing for a user of Facebook to expect?
Yes, Senator. I think everyone should have control over how their information is used. And as we've talked about in some of the other questions, I think that is laid out in some of the documents. But more importantly, you want to give people control in the product itself. So the most important way that this happens across our services is that every day people come to our services to choose to share photos or send messages. And every single time they choose to share something, they have a control right there about who they want to share it with. But that level of control is extremely important.
They certainly know within the Facebook pages who their friends are, but they may not know, as has happened, and you've conceded this point in the past, that sometimes that information is going way beyond their friends, and sometimes people have made money off of sharing that information.
I 2017 foretog Facebook et opsigtsvækkende eksperiment i Australien og New Zealand. Det er altså lidt vildt det her. Facebook forsøgte i eksperimentet direkte at målrette sig efter unge Facebook-brugers indre dæmoner. Det er præcis de samme mekanismer, præcis de samme metoder. Facebook undskyldte med at forklare, at de har et mål om at blive en privatorienteret platform i fremtiden. Men allerede i 2019 dukker der endnu en retssag op, hvor Cambridge Analytica og Facebook begge bliver sat for en kalifornisk domstol. I retten forlangte forskellige Facebook-brugere at få svar på, om de var blevet manipuleret med af Cambridge Analytica. Og så forlangte de, at Facebook skulle give dem den data tilbage, som de havde stjålet fra dem og givet videre til Cambridge Analytica.
Putting our private information on offer without concern for possible misuses, I think, is simply irresponsible. I invited my constituents going into the weekend to participate in this hearing today by submitting what they want to ask you. And so my questions are theirs. And Mr. Chairman, I'd like unanimous consent to place all of their questions in the record.
Without objection.
So these are a series of just yes-no questions. Do you think you have a moral responsibility to run a platform that protects our democracy? Yes or no?
Congresswoman, yes.
Have users of Facebook who were caught up in the Cambridge Analytica debacle been notified?
Yes, we are starting to notify people this week. We started Monday, I believe.
Will Facebook offer to all of its users a blanket opt-in to share their privacy data with any third-party users?
Congresswoman, yes, that's how our platform works. You have to opt in to sign into any app before you use it.
Well, let me just add that it is a minefield in order to do that. And you have to make it transparent, clear, in pedestrian language, just once. This is what we will do with your data. Do you want this to happen or not? So I think that this is being blurred. I think you know what I mean by it. Are you aware of other third-party information mishandlings that have not been disclosed?
Congresswoman, no. Although we are currently going through the process of investigating every single
you're not
app
sure?
that had access to a large amount of data.
What does that mean?
It means that we're going to look into every app that had a large amount of access to data in the past before we locked down the platform.
So you're not
imagine
aware.
that because there are tens of thousands of apps, we will find some
All right,
that
I only have 4 minutes.
And when we
Was
find
your
them-
data included in the data sold to the malicious third parties? Your personal data?
Yes.
It was. Are you willing to change your business model in the interest of protecting individual privacy?
Congresswoman, have made and are continuing to make changes to reduce the amount of
No,
data.
are you willing to change your business model in the interest of protecting individual privacy?
Congresswoman, I'm not sure what that means.
Well, I'll follow up with you on it. When did Facebook learn that Cambridge Analytica's research project was actually for targeted psychographic political campaign work?
Congresswoman, it might be useful to clarify what actually happened here.
Well, no, I don't have time for a long answer, though. When did Facebook learn that? And when you learned it, did you contact their CEO immediately? And if not, why not?
Congresswoman, yes. When we learned in 2015 that a Cambridge University researcher associated with the academic institution that built an app that people chose to share
We know what
their data
happens with them, but I'm asking you.
Yes, I'm answering your question.
Right.
When we learned about that, we
So in
immediately...
2015, you learned about it?
Yes.
And you spoke to their CEO immediately?
We shut down the app.
Did you speak to
And
their
we
CEO
demanded-
immediately?
We got in touch with them, and we asked them we demanded that they delete any of the data that they had, and their chief data officer told us that they had.
Lad os lige se på det her med Facebooks nye privatorienterede platform. Fordi hvad angår brugernes rettigheder i den her sag, så stod Facebooks advokat foran dommeren i retten og bekræftede, at ingen Facebook-bruger kan have nogen som helst forventning om privatliv. Fordi enhver Facebook-bruger, som benytter platformen, som der typisk deler informationer med 100 personer eller flere i deres netværk, som mange af os jo gør. Når først de har gjort det, så har de ingen ret til privatliv, der sætter dem i stand til at hævde nogen form for retslig fred i deres privatliv.
Today, Mark Zuckerberg finally appeared before the European Parliament to testify about Facebook's impact on society, from data privacy to elections. But the format was different from what most American viewers are probably used to. Instead of a back and forth between Zuckerberg and the politicians, all the members of the parliament asked their questions first. Zuckerberg took notes, and at the end of the meeting, he picked out the questions he wanted to respond to. Then he promised he'd get back to the group with the rest. The entire thing was a little frustrating even to the legislators, and eventually dissolved into a mess.
I asked you 6 yes and no questions. I got not a single answer.
So thank you again for inviting
Mr.
me
Zuckerberg,
and for
I
having
think
me.
there was one question raised by Guy Verhofstadt, and that's linked to my question.
The problem is the timing. Okay.
I'll make sure we follow up and get you answers to those.
Despite that, the European legislators asked some pretty good questions, and weren't afraid to be a little aggressive.
You have to ask yourself how you will be remembered. As one of the 3 big internet giants, together with Steve Jobs, I should say, and Bill Gates, who have enriched our world and our societies. Or on the other hand, in fact, a genius who created a digital monster that is destroying our democracies and our societies for the moment.
And I'm asking you today very, very clearly that would you accept that today Facebook is not a platform for all ideas that is operated impartially.
The most pressing question Zuckerberg faced was whether Facebook was a monopoly. During last month's congressional hearings, Senator Lindsey Graham asked whether Zuckerberg could name a competitor to Facebook. And a couple of European legislators brought that issue up again, but with a more pointed threat attached.
Would you consider your company as a monopoly? I think it is time to discuss breaking Facebook monopoly because it's already too much power in only one hand. Can you convince me not to do so?
You cannot convince him. Because it's nonsense, naturally. You have given the example of Twitter. You have given the example, I think, also of Google, as some of your competitors. But it's like somebody who has a monopoly in making cars is saying, look, I have a monopoly making cars, but there is no problem. You can take a plane. You can take a train.
When it came time to answer, Zuckerberg said that he didn't think that was true at all, and generally dismissed the concern.
We exist in a very competitive space where people use a lot of different tools for communication. Where the average person uses about 8 different tools for communication, ranging from all sorts of private messaging up to more broadcast mediums to things where they're communicating with groups of people and all of their friends at once. So from where I sit, it feels like there are new competitors coming up every day. There are competitors that reach tens and hundreds of millions of people, and we're constantly needing to evolve our service in order to stay relevant and serve people well. So that feels like it's a competitive environment where there are many choices that people have.
A number of politicians suggested that even if it isn't time to break up a monopoly, Facebook needs to be aggressively regulated.
Are you ready to completely comply with the new regulation in Europe within the next 3 days?
When you said that the regulation would be implemented in spirit, what does that mean exactly?
In response, Zuckerberg offered what's become a canned reply.
I don't think the question here is whether or not there should be regulation. I think the question is what is the right regulation?
But so far, these right regulations remain elusive. And as one legislator pointed out early in the hearing, self-regulation has not worked well in the past.
It's a little bit like with the banks in the 2006, 2007, 2008. They said also, no, we're going to do self-regulation. Don't bother. No, we're going to do it ourselves. The reality is that they didn't do them themselves, and it was needed to have tough regulation.
Then there was the question of how Facebook stores data, especially of people who aren't even on Facebook, otherwise known as their shadow profiles.
How can non-users stop Facebook collecting their data? And what do you do with the non-Facebook data? Do you commercialize it? And given you do that, is it morally acceptable, do you think, in your opinion, to collect non-Facebook users' data without them knowing what you do with it?
And Zuckerberg nearly concluded without even mentioning these.
Is there anything else here?
Shadow profiles. Shadow profiles.
He didn't seem to want to talk about shadow profiles at all, and changed the subject pretty quickly.
If you're not a Facebook user, how do you stop that data being transferred?
On a security side, we think it's important to keep it to protect people in our community. Were there any other themes that we want to get through? I mean,
These hearings are happening largely because people are worried about election meddling on Facebook, whether through fake news propaganda or through Cambridge Analytica's data siphoning. This wasn't lost on legislators.
Will Facebook commit to, 1, eradicate all remaining fake accounts by the end of the quarter, and B, systematically prevent the creation of new ones moving forward?
Zuckerberg's continued to say there's no quick fix to this problem.
We'll never be perfect on this. Our adversaries, especially on the election side, people who are trying to interfere, will have access to some of the same AI tools that we will.
But that's a pretty obvious statement. The details are what matter, and Facebook is still just talking up its 2 favorite weapons: moderators and AI.
The game plan is a combination of building more AI tools to identify fake accounts that are trying to interfere and take them down, like we did in the French presidential election. But our vision for how we should manage the system is going to move from one of reactive management as people in our community flag things to one where we're more proactively having systems look at the content, flag things for tens of thousands of people to review, and we're already making significant progress in doing that.
And there were a lot of other questions which were never answered. These included broad questions about whether Facebook can really keep people's data safe after Cambridge Analytica.
Is Cambridge Analytica an isolated case, or would you say it's the top of the iceberg?
But also extremely specific ones about how quickly Facebook scrubs data that a user asks to be deleted.
If people want to come off Facebook, how quickly and under what conditions will their data be fully removed?
Or whether Facebook would work with antitrust regulators to prove it's not a monopoly.
Could you or would you cooperate with the European antitrust authorities to examine it and to open your books so that we can see if yes or no there is a monopoly?
Zuckerberg promised to give written answers to all these questions. But that's the same line he used during the US congressional hearings. We don't know when the answers will come, how thorough they'll be, or if Zuckerberg will give a straight answer to the toughest demands.
Can you guarantee to the Europeans that another scandal will not happen in 3, 6 or 9 months' time?
Is the only way of preventing Facebook collecting my data to avoid the internet altogether?
And after watching legislators ask good, difficult questions about Facebook, that feels like a huge wasted opportunity. Is Facebook really taking its responsibilities more seriously? Will lawmakers start trying to regulate it? Or will we just keep hearing this same speech over and over?
So the fact that maybe you have less control or no control about your own company for the moment, because you have to apologize now, I think in total you apologize now 15 or 16 times the last decade. In 2003 you started. Every year you have one or other wrongdoing or problem with Facebook, and you have to face the reality and to say sorry and to say that you're going to fix it. Are you capable to fix it?
Hvordan må vores digitale fremtid kommer til at se ud?
Across the country, cameras and spyware are watching, mapping your digital footprint to every step you take. What you do, say, and even think is being monitored and marked against you. The party calls it social credit, a personal scorecard for 1.4 billion citizens, rewards for good behaviour and punishments for bad. It's not fully operational yet, but this report will show you a vision of China's dystopian future, the world's first digital dictatorship. China's cities are already flush with cameras, around 200 million of them. What's changing is they're getting smarter. China is positioning itself to lead the world in artificial intelligence. Surveillance technology is a key proving ground. Facial recognition, body scanning, and geo-tracking, matched with your personal data and online behaviour, will power the social credit system, leaving no dark corner to hide in. At the World Intelligence Congress in Tianjin, Big Brother's new toys are on show. Several of the exhibitors here, including tech giant Alibaba, are now working with the state to write the algorithms that will calculate your social credit score. They've already got the know-how and the user data from their financial credit system, Alipay. Pilot programs for a national social credit system are already underway. By 2020, the official outline boasts it will allow the trustworthy to roam freely under heaven, while making it hard for the discredited to take a single step.
觉得中国真的在很短时间能发展成现在的这个样子，我觉得真的非常自豪。另外我也觉得，就是由于大数据的发展和一些新的一些 digital 手段的一个发展，然后现在在中国生活真的很方便、很便捷。
Fan Dandan is going places, very much the modern Chinese woman. She's a marketing professional, diligent and prosperous, and sees clear skies in her digital future.
那么其实政府已经掌握了我们很多资料，然后政府方也掌握了一些我们个人信用，就比如说是否遵纪守法啊，以及我们的教育程度。那我觉得如果把所有的大数据，那对我们来讲其实是更高效的。
A model citizen, Dandan will rate highly on social credit. That her every action will be tracked and judged is fine by her.
其实是的，但我觉得哪儿的人可能都希望有一个非常稳定的一个和谐的一个社会。那如果真的像国家现在在努力去做的这个事情，每个角落都有这个，就是每个公共区域的拐角都有这个摄像头的话，其实我觉得我会觉得更安全一些。
Dandan's criminal, academic and medical records will feed into her score, as well as state security assessments. Her shopping habits will be another measure. Her score could even change in real time, depending on what she puts in her trolley. Buy a lot of alcohol suggests dependence. Lose a couple of points. Buy a pack of nappies, gain a few, suggests responsibility. Late on mortgage payments or your tax return, lose a lot more. Not that Dandan would risk that. She keeps a close eye on her financial rating via a mobile payment app. So this is Sesame Credit, right?
Yep.
So what's the score that you have? So you've got
773.
773. So
Correct.
what's the maximum you can get?
I think it's 800.
So you got a pretty good score.
Oh wow, I think I'm doing well. Not the best, but yeah,
But
somewhere on top.
773. So what kind of access or what kind of privileges does that give you?
This is like for rent cars. I don't have to pay deposit.
So you don't have to pay a deposit? Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and this is also for a hotel, and also no deposit for renting a house.
China's middle class is on the rise. Like Dandan, they're mostly young, urban, and used to living much of their lives online and on devices.
现场演示一下那个支付宝的那个，正好给你把那个什么打开，那个这是什么？阿里巴巴生活缴费，我按一下。对，就这是你已经就是你只要在上面发生任何就是有支付的行为，就会是在上面有个记录，然后你走路的步数也会有那个什么。我一会儿发股风给你，就是你要是成为了客户的话，我们俩都有那个券。
所以我觉得这个，我觉得只是对我来讲，这个信用体系的产生并不是一个新的东西，我觉得它是已有的一个东西，只是把它用一个更高效的方式，线上的方式去整合它。所以我觉得，对，这其实是在我们已有的基础上去建立这么一个体系。
Who you date and ultimately partner with will also affect your social credit. Dandan married for love, but she also chose the right husband. Zhang Xiaojing's score is likely to be even higher than hers. Xiaojing is a civil servant with the Justice Department, a loyal cadre of the party.
外交或者通交的国家，对吧？大家付出复利，其实都是一个信用体系。当然，对于我们就是内部而言，民众而言，大家也希望大家都是人与之间互助、互爱，然后互帮， 然后大家共同的那个富裕。第二个，我希望就像习总书记说的那个，我们能够达到就是富强、民主、文明、和谐、美丽，是吧？他提出的一个那个国家的发展希望，当然也是我们全中国人民的希望。
我们看看今天中国人的这个精神面貌就知道，他们被蒙住了眼睛，捂住了耳朵，实际上是又聋又瞎的。他们其实很多信息都不知道，就呈现在一种虚幻的这个感觉里面。
I've come to Chongqing City, a high-tech metropolis in central China, where the Jialing River meets the Yangtze. I'm here to meet one of the 10 million people who've seen the dark side of the social credit system. Investigative journalist Liu Hu. With a street-smart, hands-on approach, Hu has exposed high-level corruption and solved murder cases abandoned by the police. In many countries, he'd be celebrated, not in China.
我觉得很多政府把我当成敌人吧。我们更倾向于它是一种宣传的机器，它可以向国民来灌输一些东西，而不是说需要大家去了解真相。要是有人去阻挠、去披露它，那么我就认为它跟贪腐，这个贪腐它是一伙的。
In 2015, Hu lost a defamation case after he accused an official of extortion. He was made to publish an apology and pay a fine, but when the court demanded an additional fee, Hu refused. Then in 2017, he found himself suddenly locked out of society. Under a pilot social credit scheme, he'd been blacklisted as dishonest.
我有一些律师朋友，也有一些法官朋友，他们都告诉我们，失信是因为欠钱。我不欠钱，我是不能够纳入这个名单的。
Hu maintains he has fully met the terms of his 2015 case. He believes his blacklisting is political, but he has no way of challenging it.
那个，我有两方面看法。第一个是，很多错误的被纳入这个信用系统的人，他没法摆脱。
His poor social credit rating has shut down his travel options and confined him to effective house arrest in Chongqing.
我现在是已经被限制这个自由的出行了，就是订票啊，我们高铁和飞机都不行。我跟你演示一下，我们用这个 APP 来订票。现在是我们从重庆到西安，我们来订一张票，订一张过几天的票。
And what does it say?
然后就显示那个出票失败，说我已经被法院依法限制高消费，限制乘坐 G 字头列车。
Hu's social media accounts have also been closed. Before his arrest, he had nearly 2 million followers. It's where he published much of his journalism.
我曾经有过好几个微博，10几个。这些微博号现在都没有了。最新的一个，这个是被封的一个号，现在是这个号是没有了。
Hu scrapes by, writing for an online publication. His investigative reports are on hold. It's not his first run-in with censorship. In August 2013, he was detained without trial after exposing a senior party member's links with illegal prostitution. This is a recreation based on Hu's accounts.
你的行为对社会已经造成了诽谤罪，你认不认罪？如果你承认了，领导高兴了就把你给放了。
Over the course of a year, he was interrogated more than 70 times.
就是说，你要跟我们配合，你不配合，等你出来，你这个工作也没了，你老婆孩子也跟人跑了。
Hu refused to confess and was eventually released. Now he's trapped again, the four walls of a cell replaced by social credits dragnet.
那个进去出来这几年，5年时间嘛，到现在，我们媒体行业是变化很大的，没法干，大家很多人都离开这个行业了，包括特别是做调查的、做深度报道的记者是越来越少。我想我只是还喜欢这个，就尽可能多的留在这个地方，然后写一些我愿意写的一些故事，也能够起一些作用吧。
I'm going to a place where the principles of social credit have been taken to brutal extremes. The party doesn't want the world to know about it. Reporting on the situation is risky. To get there, we must fly 4,000 kilometers from Beijing to the western edge of China. Xinjiang, the nation's largest province, and according to some, the world's largest open prison. Xinjiang is the homeland of the Uyghurs, Turkic people of Islamic faith. China's rulers have struggled to control the region and its people for 2 millennia. Surveillance technology is the new weapon in their campaign.
Bu nazorat sistemasi 2016 yılı yıl ahırı kelgende shuningdan keyin biz burun ko'rib bakmagan, anglab bakmagan, hech qanday biz tajriba qilib bakmagan kuzatish sistemalari, nazorat sistemalari orqadan paydo bo'ldi.
Tahir Hamid is a Uyghur filmmaker and poet from the Xinjiang city of Kashgar. He can talk about the situation there because he managed to escape with his family to the US, where they've applied for political asylum. He made the decision to flee last year.
5. ay bo'lsa kerak, bizga saqchi punktdan telefon qildi. Kelsanglar deb bo'ldi deb biz saqchi punktiga bordik. Saqchi punktiga borgandan keyin bizni bir saqchi punktniki yer osti uyiga boshlab kirdi. Bu yer osti uyi odatda so'roq qilingan uy. Mayindagi ishxonalarda zanjirlar issiqliq, biz yo'lbos o'rindiq deydigan jinoyatchilarni qo'lini bog'lab qo'yib o'tirib, so'roq qiladigan o'rindiqlar, temir o'rindiqlar bor. Biz uning ichiga kirgandan keyin taxminan bu yerda bir 20-30 odam bor. Hammasi Uyg'ur ularniki. Birinchi qadamda bizga navbat kelgan chog'da ayolimda ishganlarniki qon oldi. Ikkinchi qadamda bizning ovozimizni oldi. Uchinchi bosqichda bizniki barmoq izimizni oldi. Demak, buni tugatib bo'lgandan keyin, anadan keyin 4-chi qadamda bizniki yuzimizni suratga oldi. Biz endi bu suratga olgan chog'da apparatni qaraymiz, qarab turib, bo'dil qarab, andan keyin o'ngga qaytib kelamiz, solga, yana qaytib kelamiz, ustiga qaytib kelamiz, ostiga.
Tahir and his wife were being scanned by facial recognition software. Their faces mapped from all angles to enhance accuracy. They were even forced to produce a range of facial expressions.
Menimcha bu kontrol sistemasi Uyg'urlarga nishonli qildi qaratilgan bir xil sistema. Chunki bir Xitoydagi bir davlatda biz bir osonlik millat hisoblanadigan bir millatda milliy madaniyat siyosiy harakatninki birinchi hujum nishoni bo'ldi.
Inside Kashgar, it's almost impossible to report independently. Government officials do their best to conceal any sign of the oppression Tahir describes. Look closer and the cracks appear. The party-approved vision of this city is a facade. Kashgar's historic old town has been demolished and just one section rebuilt as a sort of Uyghur theme park for Chinese tourists. You can buy souvenirs, try the local cuisine, and even see a show. But there's tension in the air. The locals can't speak with us. Armed guards and cameras keep a watchful eye, and Chinese flags claim the rooftops, even the dome of the mosque.
So it's quite difficult to film here. We've got about 6 miners with us the whole time. They're telling us what we can film, what we can't do. Sometimes they delete our material. On top of that, we've got about another 8 to 10 security guards that further restrict our movements. What I can tell you from the car is that though they've set up a kind of grid-like management system, and every 100 metres or so you see a police station, and they're aided with enormous amounts of CCTV cameras, with facial recognition, to really have a total control here. What is clear is that there is quite a brutal, repressive crackdown going on here, and technology is at the centre of it.
Kan vi overhovedet undgå big techs altseende øje? Der findes jo enkelte måder som eksempelvis VPN, der sender alt dine data gennem en mere sikker server i et andet land, eller browseren DuckDuckGo, men det er nu ikke engang så sikker på mere. Og det betyder desværre heller ikke så meget i det hele store. Fordi vi bekæmper ikke de her mekanismer ved bare at undlade at bruge Google Search. Som vi har hørt det så mange gange før. Det her er et kollektivt problem, der kræver en kollektiv handling.
Give you the idea that you have freedom of choice. You don't. You have no choice. You have owners. They own you. They own everything. They own all the important land. They own and control the corporations. They've long since bought and paid for the Senate, the Congress, the state houses, the city halls. They got the judges in their back pockets. And they own all the big media companies, so they control just about all of the news and information you get to hear. They got you by the balls. It's a big club, and you ain't in it. You and I are not in the big club. By the way, it's the same big club they used to beat you over the head with all day long, where they tell you what to believe all day long, beating you over the head in their media, telling you what to believe, what to think, and what to buy. The table is tilted, folks. The game is rigged, and nobody seems to notice. Nobody seems to care. Good, honest, hard-working people, white collar, blue collar, doesn't matter what color shirt you have on. Good, honest, hard-working people continue. These are people of modest means. Continue to elect these rich cocksuckers who don't give a fuck about them. They don't care about you at all, at all, at all. Man, you know? And nobody seems to notice, nobody seems to care. That's what the owners count on, the fact that Americans will probably remain willfully ignorant because the owners of this country know the truth. It's called the American dream because you have to be asleep to believe it.